I am Rabbi Mike Moskowitz. My pronouns are he, him. I am the scholar and residence for trans and queer Jewish studies at CBST, which is the world's largest LGBT synagogue. It's located here in New York City. When I'm not working in advocacy and allyship, I do make a mean for Tana. I mastered the cast iron frittata this weekend for the first time, but we're not going to be talking about dads. This is not about dads talking about cooking. This is dads talking about gender, and for that, I'm here with my dear friend and fellow dad, Bergman. And Bear, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit, and then we will get this conversation started.
For sure. Thank you. I'm Bergman. I also use he, him pronouns. I'm a writer and storyteller and educator. I do a lot of work also, like my esteemed colleague, about LGBTQ issues and particularly around trans and non-binary and genderqueer topics. Yeah, I'm a father of three, which in most circumstances, and especially in queer circumstances, makes people be like, oh, three. But, you know, stacked up against the Rabbi, I'm behind, but I'm not, there will be no catching up. I am fathering as much as I want. Oh, and a puppy who you might occasionally hear because sometimes someone has the temerity to come to the door and he doesn't like it. But yeah, I'm really glad to be having this conversation with you. And honestly, part of the reason is that I feel like so many of the conversations that are about parenting and gender and trans and non-binary kids, so many of them are moms. And I feel like I got a lot of feedback when we announced this from people who said versions of, oh, good, now I have something to show my dad. As if, I don't know, the dads don't listen to the women, like, which maybe, and that's a separate problem. But also I've been thinking about it ever since, like, that's true. We don't hear much from the dads. I'm wondering what you think about that.
I think you're right. And so I wanted to mention that the last 15 minutes we'll have open for questions. So feel free to put them in the chat. Jesse here is taking a look and then we'll revisit them. You can put them in the chat whenever you want. In the last 15 minutes, we'll open it up for questions from folks. Well, one of the, I think for me, the big struggles in these conversations is how quickly the language has shifted and the roles have shifted. And I think one of the intergenerational problems is that as parents, I still kind of default to the way in which my parents parented me, and they defaulted to the way that their parents, you know, my father, is a pediatric cardiologist. Growing up, my mother did not work. And so my mother was the one making horrible Humentaschen.
I assure you she worked, but perhaps she didn't work for pay outside the
100%. No salary could have done justice. You can imagine that having me as a child, right? You needed a higher pay, hazard pay for being my parent. She worked very, very hard. She should live and be well. And so I think part of what I think society is shifting is a recognition of how the roles that people are fulfilling today have very little, if anything, to do with those artificial kind of mass-produced prefabricated roles of our generation growing up. But in a vacuum, like that's kind of the default, that people assume that it's easier for mothers to talk to their kids about these things because they're spending more time with them, or they're somehow emotionally more close. And so therefore talking about these things that are more intimate or personal might be easier, and that, like, if it hurts, mommy will make it better. And that's kind of the role. And the language around these things and the experiences are often not pleasant, especially when they are in response to the way in which society is setting up certain expectations, wherein kids are saying, yeah, but that's not my lived experience, that's not who I am, this doesn't fit who I am. So I think when I was young and something didn't feel good, I went to my mother. And so it could be that this is part of that. And I think part of kind of the empowerment that parents need to have is access to the experience of being a dad and having the comfort of talking about these. So I'm really grateful to be in conversation with you about these things. I know that you've written extensively about this, and I just recently read the article that you had in Parenting Married Things, Parenting Else, that really describes ways in which we can model and support different age groups differently. So maybe we could really just get started with, when we were younger, what were the defaults of the way in which society assumed gender existed, portrayed itself, had expectations? What, if any, of that was actually helpful and has stayed the same? And maybe as a way of contrasting, what part of that was horrific and has since been replaced in better ways of doing that?
I mean, as a trans man, my childhood, when I was assumed and experienced as a girl, was a real mixed bag. But there was a lot of intense, there were many efforts starting from a fairly early age to to try and get me to be more feminine, more girly. It didn't take, clearly, but there was a lot of, my mother did a lot of work, both my parents, to be fair, did a lot of work to try to get me to be more of a girl. And I remember, I used to joke around that I thought my mother bought my clothes at the Gender Panic Emporium, because in my memory, they were all like pink, and they had glitter, and they had like kittens and flowers and a ruffle and a cap sleeve and like all of it, as though just by sheer force of embellishments that they could get me to be more girly. Not the case. And the hardest part about that wasn't the attempt to make me be more girly. It was the constant failure. Like, I was constantly disappointing, and that was rough. But and wildly, it was the 70s. Like, I was born in 1974. I had Free to Be You and Me on vinyl and as a book. We were all singing about William's doll and, It's Okay for Boys to Cry and all the rest of it. But somehow I was beyond the pale, I think. I almost don't feel any sense that gender roles for kids have changed that much. I think we've become a little more comfortable with a wider circle of variance, which is good. And I see, my children go to my two younger ones that are still in school, they go to, a peace and justice focused, organic, vegetarian, morally superior alternative school, which I love. And, that's very much me as well. And so, but even there, by the time they get to, 10, 11 years old, no matter how much, this is a school that has a gender splendor week. When it was Trans Day of Visibility, they took cups and wrote trans pride, like on the tennis court fence in 4-foot tall letters. Like, really, they're very into it over there. There are multiple trans parents and trans kids at the school. And even still, by the end, something's happening. There's an intense cultural force at work. And so when I think back, like, oh, were any of the gendered things valuable? Was any of it good? It's remarkably difficult for me to identify anything in the sort of gender in the sort of compulsory gendered categories that was good. I think about that, and I wish that I could think of something, but I constantly just return to the idea that, you know, kids expressing their genders have been having a hard time since the beginning of colonization, and are still having a pretty hard time. And so it's hard to identify something that might be good. Can you think of anything that was?
So my experience as a cis guy who never thought about gender and still has to put in a decent amount of effort to be sensitive to it, and it's almost always external, like show up to a place, remember that you're a guy, remember that there are other people who are not, that people are gonna, you know, not talk over you, but they're like, it's a process of thinking about the implications of the way in which I present. But really, from the time I was told which bathroom to use until someone in my family said, hey, I'm not a girl, I'm a boy, I did not think about gender. And being a parent has absolutely forced me to think about and to re-examine and to attempt to find language. And there's something still that's very inorganic about it. And I have 4 kids, and I guess, and this is my follow-up question, that as parents, including, I'm assuming, our parents, like, we want to be good, we want to be helpful, we want to model, we want to make life easier, we want to empower kids to be able to make good choices and to. So if there was really nothing positive about the gendered, kind of forced gendered assumption, and people are who they are, I don't think I am who I am because I had that. I'm not one who goes with the flow. I'm not one who's, not, that just told what to do. We find our own way. So then the question really becomes, what's the best way of acknowledging that gender is real? For many, gender is real. And for many, gender is something that people are aware of very, very, very young, way before they have even, any sort of idea of who they might be attracted to. Perhaps even before they understand what society expects of that gender. But so what are ways, like simple ways from a really young age, that we should talk about the gender experiences and gender in a way that allows for a person to be able to communicate who they are and also experiment and explore?
I feel like there were about 11 questions in what you just said. And my brain right now is like one of those old school train terminal boards where all the cards are just going like tick, 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 tick as things flip over.
You pick whatever lands well.
So there's sort of 2 things. And one of them is, I think that gender is real, absolutely. And I think that many of us have our own internal sense of it. But I wonder how much we are able, from inside our own experience, to take into account the really intense sort of forces that work on us around gender, and we're sort of 2 different places on the sphere, right? Like, I was being force-fed something that I vigorously rejected, and you had an experience where you were sort of in sync with the program expected of you, and so you were able to carry on with it with no difficulty. But I think about all of the subtleties, like not just negative peer pressure where you wear a sweater or sing a song and someone says, oh, that's not right, don't do that, like, no one, you're not upholding the expectations of your gender, but also the positive peer pressure where you do a thing and people react with approval, like, oh, you're doing a good job. Right. And I think that that's the one that we talk about less, but that actually matters more in a certain way. Whereas, but just when kids do things, whatever they do, and we like them or their peers like them, we say, yes, that's great. Or we give them positive attention, or we, we buy them a blazer and then we say, oh, you look so adorable in your blazer. And then we go out and buy them another blazer, right? All of that. And I sometimes think that we focus a lot on the negative peer pressure, in part because it's very like, you know, it's where the water meets the rocks and makes rapids. So it comes to our attention and it feels dangerous and it puts us on alert. But it also allows us to not think as much about the ways that we're influenced by positive pressure to do a certain thing or be a certain way. And I sometimes think that those, as a father, I feel like that's the one that I'm constantly on guard against. Like whatever my children, you know, wear or say or whatever genders they are having, right? That's fine. That's okay. But I'm always a little worried that one of them's gonna do something that feels like it will be approved of by the wider world, and I will give them more positive reinforcement about it than I mean to, and therefore push them in a certain direction. So for me as a parent, with 3 kids, sometimes I meet people and they're like, oh, how many children do you have? I have 3, boys, girls, and I say, one of each. And then they sort of look at me like perhaps I have not understood the question. But of course, I mean, as you know, at the moment, right? As of today, I have 1 cis girl and 1 non-binary kid and 1 cis boy. So I really feel like I lucked out, you know, like I got a full set. And then, you know, so there's that. But then your other question about what to do for little kids, I was talking to a social worker for the article you mentioned in today's Parent about how to talk to kids about gender. And the social worker, whose name is Helen Hargreaves, said something so smart that I keep thinking about it. She said, all children's play is communication, and the toys we give them are vocabularies. And I was like, that's so smart. And so, you know, she sort of went on like, dolls are a vocabulary of nurturing, and trains are a vocabulary of problem solving, and superheroes are a vocabulary of power. And I was like, yes, this is great. And so one of the things that is so easy for parents to do with kids really of any age is to really be attentive to the question of what vocabularies are you introducing into your communication with them? Like, what are you providing the vocabulary for? And I think about that a lot now, even though my kids are sort of getting older. The youngest is going to turn 6 soon. But I still really see it in them communicating by what they play with, how they play with it, and how they want to share their play with me. And I also feel really grateful that they all still want to share what they're doing with me. That feels in and of itself like a very positive sign. I remember by the time I was my middle child's age, I was pretty post sharing with my family of origin, which I think probably had something to do with how disapproved of I constantly felt, but also, you know, what kind of vocabularies we had between us. What are your, like, when you reflect on that as a dad, where do you like put your focus?
Oh, yeah. Thank you for sharing all of that. I think for me, I would say particularly with my older kids, my oldest is 17 now and kind of too cool for her dad, or Tati as she calls me, which is fine because at 17, I was way cooler than my dad. It's par for the course. When they were younger, I really focused exclusively on trying to be a good human being, right? Like you shared so nicely, you know, you spoke so nicely. Thank you so much for cleaning up. Thank you so much for offering to help. Thank you so, like, things that had nothing to do with gender, in part because at that point I raised them in such a rigid, like house was mommy cooks, Tati learns, right? There wasn't there wasn't a lot of space there for creative production of, so what kind of potato kugel do you want to make? Peppery potato kugel, or right? It was pretty narrow. And I felt that, and still feel that whoever my kids will be, will have much less to do with who I am and what I do, and much more about who they really are. And so what I wanted to do was try, and this is perhaps a theological point. I see the role of parents as becoming obsolete. At some point, God willing, in the natural order of this world, our kids will be here and we will have moved on. So at the end of it all, we want to leave them with the skill set of being self-sufficient. So from the time that they were really like able to almost even crawl or turn over, there was a space. This is your space. So it happens to be, it's the size of the blanket. This is the blanket for you to be on. Okay, now you can crawl to here. This is a room for you, right? And then at some point they get older, you can cross the street. So I think I was always focused on, what does it look like right now for you to like master this skill set? Oh, wow, you can put food in your mouth. The gender piece for me was never part of that, because, and on some level, because I thought it was so predetermined. Like little did I know how not determined. And I think that's why for me, when he said, I'm not a girl, I'm a boy, I could gain no traction, because what does that even mean? Like, I don't understand what you're saying. And it was only when I came to the place of realizing that I just don't know, and that's what makes me cis, I was able to listen. So I think when we give our kids the ability to speak and to communicate in whatever ways that they do, and we add value to that, we appreciate that, like, I want to hear from you, I want to understand, talk to me. And evidently I was successful, that when my kid told me this, they were like 6, and I was like, I don't understand. They also told me that they wanted to be called Spike. And I said no, because I felt like I'm still your parent, and like, so I think that having that communication, like, I can tell you what I perceive, but I can't tell you what you're feeling. So I need you to communicate. That I think is super healthy, and a great indicator that our kids recognize they're in relationship with us, and that we have a role that, no, you can't have chocolate chips for breakfast. Like, you can't, and for lunch and for dinner. Like, that's not okay. So why is that not okay? But if you want to, like, okay, because you have, like, there are things which are essential to you, and I also have a job to make sure that you're healthy. So I think there's almost a way in which that I think, for me, avoiding speaking about gender or trying to raise gendered kids probably made it a little bit easier, and that there really weren't expectations, meaning nobody wanted to come to shul with Tati. Nobody wanted to cook. Like, they all just wanted to. So I think in that way, but I do still kind of think about, we're not supposed to teach material, we're supposed to teach students. And we're not supposed to parent as, this is who I am, independent of who the kids are. We're meant to parent particular kids who have unique blends of all the things. But I do wonder, like, what are kind of the bigger principles about not erasing gender, but really kind of allowing for the interface with, in ways that not only let kids know that they're not limited in what gendered aspects or attributes of themselves they have, but also in trying to model for them, like, what does that look like? To try to say this differently, and I'm going to say this in the form of a question, and you could say, I don't know, and we can move on. But when I think obsessively about where gender lies, like, what is essential about masculinity? What is essential about femininity, right? Today's International Women's Day, right? It's not getting paid 70 cents on the dollar. That's not what makes somebody essentially just, right? So when somebody says to you, Dad, like, what does it mean to be a guy? Like, what would you say to them?
I would say, let's schedule a conversation for a month from now while I collect my thoughts on this matter. Possibly an outline, a spreadsheet, a chart, a graph. And that's the thing, right? Is that we're all sort of, it's a little bit like the Walmart problem. On one hand, Walmart is a disaster. On the other hand, some people can only feed their families by shopping at Walmart. So there's always, we're living in the world we have, we're working for the world we want. And I always feel a little bit like I have a foot in each of two rowboats as I try to explain gender while also, pulling it apart and decoupling it from many of its recent historical functions. For someone to say, what does it mean to be a guy? I mean, my off the cuff answer is, it can mean whatever you want. If that is a gender that feels resonant to you, what does it mean to you to be a guy? And also, if that's your gender, then all of the things about it are guy things, regardless of what they are. Are we going to say, it's okay for you to knit, but knitting is a feminine activity? I would never say that. I would say, if regardless of your gender, if you wish to knit or chop down trees or, accidentally make 1100 Hamantaschen, then right, then that is a valid expression of your gender. I would probably do better with a question in terms of being able to give an actual answer, although I guess that is to some degree an answer. There are, if asked to talk about what it means, to society or in the macro culture, I think I could probably say, certain kinds of activities are considered masculine, certain kinds of activities are considered feminine, but I don't think I would be able to do it without also talking about sexism and misogyny and their role in gender policing. The amount of space or room that we give to children who are assigned female at birth is a lot larger than the amount that we give to children who are assigned male at birth most of the time, in terms of being able to be a little more gender non-compliant, if you will. And that's because of sexism, right? It's because culturally we value masculinity more than we value femininity. And so when we see girls trying to trade up, we culturally, not you and me obviously, but we culturally understand it. We see it and we're like, oh, of course, you want to be more like your older brother, right? But when we see boys doing things that we culturally code as feminine, we, again, not us, but culturally, we experience that as a version of trading down or degrading themselves. And that's leaving beside entirely the whole question of you're telling me that we take a cursory glance at an infant's genitals as soon as they're born, and from that brief visual inspection, we make a decision about what they will do and be like for their whole life? I mean, even just to say it like that, it sounds absolutely ridiculous. What could be less scientific? We're taking a look at someone's genital topography, and from there we're predicting what they're going to be like their whole life. We'd be better off, I don't know, spinning a strawberry. Nonsense. I had a hard time there for a minute because I couldn't finish my metaphor. I was like, we'd be better off, casting stones. No, we're not casting stones. We'd be better off spinning a bottle. Wait, that's already something. Spinning a banana. No, wrong visual. Spinning I don't know, what's another fruit? Strawberry. That's what you saw happen right there as I made my way through trying to end that joke, and I just couldn't, right? But I guess my point is that I think we owe it to kids to be able to have our own critiques of gender, like phrenology. Thank you, Ellis. Good gravy. Sorry, someone put it in the chat and it popped up just as I saw it. That is an excellent metaphor, which I will use going forward. Thank you, whoever posted that. I appreciate you. I think we owe it to our kids to have a sophisticated critique of gender. I don't think that we can really be good allies to them about gender if we're not prepared to talk about what is happening and why it's happening and what cultural forces are at work. But also part of that is that I just don't know. Like, I never really felt like a girl or a woman. I have no sense of what that's like. If someone says, what does it mean to be a girl? I don't know. What does it mean to be a woman? I have no idea. But also, I never had a boyhood, which means that my manhood is sort of built on it's like a collage in a way of other people's masculinity that I have felt good about and kind of stuck together with chewing gum and paper clips. But it always feels conditional to me. As a trans man, there are plenty of people who are extremely excited to invalidate my gender at the first opportunity. And I only know about manhood in this sort of, Johnny come lately way. So I'm not sure that I could really say, someone said, what does it mean to be a man? I've only been at it for, whatever, I guess 15 years, a little more maybe, but that's not that long. I'm 46 years old. So there's a lot of missing time. Do you know what does it mean to be a man? You were a boy.
I just tell you, I was like, I hope he doesn't ask me.
This feels, well, I feel like you know better than me, right?
Well, the truth is I don't, and I'll tell you why. I was put in this body, and it's been kinder to me than I've been to it. I don't treat it so well, but I've never had to think about it. I'll tell you, when I present in a room, people don't, they're less obnoxious to me than they are to people who present female. I mean, mine has been a story of privilege. I talk, people listen, if they talk over me, I speak louder, that's acceptable. I am not the most aware person by nature. I write obsessively about masculinity, in part because it also has to go through this kind of experience of I don't understand. We have mansplaining, manspreading, there's toxic masculinity. What does that even look like to get right? Is there a model? Can we look at a person? I grew up in the South. I grew up in Richmond, Virginia. My middle school's been renamed. The street I grew up in has been renamed. All the people who there were statues of, literally, the people that there were statues of, they've all been taken down, and for very good reason. So, right, there's an absence of, look to this person got it right. So for me, and my happy place being in the world of ideas, exploring God's gendered attributes, for me, my God is an all gender God, the source of all gender, and God doesn't have a body. And thinking about and exploring the ways in which these gendered attributes are modeled by God. My God is a good God. And trying to think about what are ways that we can try to be sensitive, both for the intention and for the impact, and to be able to be godly in the way in which gender plays out. That's around issues of intimacy and consent. That's around, and which God models, right? And Seth is on the call. We've written about this. Regardless of our gender identity and sexual orientation, when we meet the Sabbath bride Friday night, we say hey, I'm interested, and then we just wait, not for the absence of no, but for an enthusiastic consent. And so looking at the way in which God says hey, I have, even about the Sabbath, hey, I have this kind of special gift in my storage house. God says to Moses, go and let them know if they're interested, I'm here, right? Because to be in an intimate space, even we just read about the giving of the Torah by Mount Sinai, the rabbinic lens sees that as an act of coercion. If God reveals God's self, God's coming out speech, how do you say no to that? There wasn't really a freedom of choice. So for me, thinking about what does it look like to be a man, what does it mean to be a good guy, to get masculinity properly? It's first to do no harm, that the person shouldn't be leveraging that aspect that presents, that has power to do anything that's bad, and to be able to use it in a way that makes the world better. So I see less about like, I want to be a good man, and rather like, I'd rather be a good person who happens to be a guy. So it's even for me, like, I don't think it's an essential, I don't see any aspect of myself of like, oh, that's essential. My wardrobe happens to be not that varied. So it could be that I'm not like a great example of this, but I don't
want my dad's sweater for this.
So that's a great, can I tell you, Bill Cosby, right, used to have a dad sweater, right? and he's in jail. Like literally the models of my youth, right, have been all imprisoned. Not all, but many. And even rabbinic figures, there's no,
Yeah.
So I guess, I mean, there's a way in which I think that gender, I don't know if this is a parallel or not, but earlier today I was speaking with an ethical humanist. And, I'd much rather have a friend and a neighbor who's a good human who doesn't believe in God than for someone who believes in God and is a horrible human. So like, male, female, for me, this is the body that God gave me. I wish I was a little bit taller. I wish I could lift heavier things. I wish I could, like there are things that if it was up to me, I would have added a few inches vertically, taken some horizontally. But it's not about masculinity for me. And so I think the question is like recognizing that gender in society is very real. What does it look like to use that and to harness that? In a way that like, say like, wow, I want my son to be like that. I want my daughter to be like this woman, right? And I want my gender, my gender nonconforming, my non-binary, my gender queer kid to be like this person. In that like they present in the world that the world is better because of them as queer, straight, cis. We have already a couple of questions, but I do want to just get your opinion because I'm a dad who has has many more questions than I have answers. Do you think the questions around exploring one's sexual orientation and sexual identity, straight, queer, those things, is that a similar framing that like you are who you are, love is love, you'll figure this out, it's less important right now? Or is that like a different conversation than trying to explore one's own gender identity?
Huh. Okay. Off the cuff, I would say that I think there are some analogs between the two. The biggest one being that in both cases, there's really a process of like consistently matching your own experience to the experience that you're being told you're supposed to have or you're going to have, and measuring the distance between them, right? There's a thing of like, oh, soon you'll be noticing boys, and some kids thinking, maybe? Or, right, like, there are a million messages about that, and that children get particularly, and then if they try to push back on them, they get told they don't know yet, they're too little, you're always too young, it's always just a phase. Although to be fair, my mother was right. I did, as she wanted, end up marrying a nice Jewish boy who is very close to his doctorate. I don't understand why that does not provide her with any comfort, but here we are. Oh, you're okay too. So in that way, I think there are some parallels. I think that people's sexual orientation, I think people misunderstand sexual orientation. They think of it as one thing. I think it's three things. I think it's behavior and desire and identity, and those don't always all go in the same direction for everyone at all times. And I think that because we don't really talk about that, people are more confused or alarmed than they need to be. And also, you know, sometimes they change. And so I think people get really like, I think there's an attachment to the idea that, you know, you have a sexual orientation and you're born that way and no one can change it. And I do believe that we are sort of pre-programmed with our sexual orientations, and I don't believe that they can be changed externally. But I do think that many people experience internal shifts, and that we value that in some areas of our lives. You know, when people are, you know, doing, you know, their own like seeking about religion or about politics or about whatever, and they come to a new place, very often we're like, good job, you're doing the thing. But when it's about sexual orientation, we get very confused. And I get it that the whole like born that way movement is a reaction to the conversion therapy movement, which I am obviously 100,000,000% against. And I would be happy to have a little time alone with some of those people. But, you know, when we think about sexual orientation, I rarely think it's as cut and dried as we have been required to represent, because there's this thing about narrative. Oh, I can feel I'm at the point of elocution safari, because what I want right now very badly is to talk about all the ways that imposed narratives from the larger culture, from straight people and from cis people, asking certain questions over and over and requiring certain answers in order to have access to medical or legal remedies, has frozen certain narratives about sexual orientation and gender identity in a way that they seem monolithic, and I really don't think they are.
Sorry.
Yes.
No, I want you to finish, but I also recognize that maybe we need to have a follow-up of two dads talking about sexuality. So sure. Don't feel like you have to say all the things right now, because I think we can. I know people at CBST. I think we can get a second one here.
I think you might be right.
But yes. But finish whatever the thought was that you want to say, and then we'll.
I too am Jewish. I don't think I've ever finished a thought. I just, you know, they just keep going. I guess what I'll say is, I think there are some similarities. I think some of them are related to the relationship between a person in a stigmatized identity living in a world that does not validate that identity. I think that some of the similarities are about the ways that we have inherited the idea that there are some narratives about gender or sexuality that are good and correct, and some that are bad or wrong. I need like the air quotes backup dancers behind me, you know. So I do think in that way they are similar. I don't experience gender as being as changeable over time as I experience sexual orientation as being, but I do think that, you know, gender is a portfolio. And as people add more and more pieces, sometimes the totality of it does begin to shift. You know, it's not like an exam where you get a grade and then you're done. It's like continuing to add to your tenure file until eventually you feel like you understand in both senses, in all senses, the body of someone's work.
Wow, it's a lot to take in, and I see everybody's head nodding in the comments that this is you're giving language to experiences which are often much more expansive than the words that we have for them, and so your vivid description of them, I think, is very helpful to me. And it looked like from all of the head nodding and bopping, either that or people were falling asleep, but I think they were.
That also happens when I talk, especially when I go on at length.
No, it's great. So we have a couple of questions here. The first one is, what's your favorite fatherly quality in yourself? What qualities do you think are crucial for dads? And what qualities do you wish were associated with fatherhood?
Okay, a few softballs to start out with. What is my favorite fatherly quality in myself? I'm a good sport. Whatever they want to do, I'm willing to give it a try. Next week, we're going to be making bismuth crystals at home. We're going to do a little home smelting. We have safety glasses. Please don't. Nobody needs to send me a lot of email about the dangers of this. I assure you, I have researched them fully. I'm definitely that guy. But I think as a dad, I am a curious person, and I'm always interested in how things work and why they do the thing, and what people think about it. And I think that, that sort of curiosity, and also the like, all right, we can try it, quality that I bring to parenting is one of my favorite qualities about myself as a father. I don't remember what the other questions were anymore. Do you want to answer that one? What's your favorite quality about yourself as a father?
Well, I don't know that I have a favorite quality about myself free from other people, much less the way it impacts other people. I'm not the best person for this, but I do, I think, project, perhaps from that place of insecurity, wanting that my kids should feel just the most unconditional love. I've got a son, he really can't read, but it could be I'm a bad parent, not because he has learning disabilities, but because he's not even aware of his own limitations. Like, he thinks he's the best reader in the room. And part of it is just because I want them to feel like, the compassion and the love, and that it's not tethered to anything. It's not conditional. It's, I love you because you're you, and I want you to be the best version of yourself, and I want you to be able to conquer the world. And even things that, like, independently I would be in opposition to if it was anybody else. So my oldest at some point wanted to reclaim the short skirt of the cheerleader by becoming a cheerleader herself. And I said, as a feminist, maybe there's a place where you could contribute that might be more impactful than literally on the sidelines cheering for guys, on the field. And she said, no, I really want to reclaim whatever. So I was the cheerleader's cheerleader. I was there and I was cheering. Also, they do this thing. They throw people up. I had to close my eyes. It was very scary for me. It's very, very scary.
I fully have that. They climb and I don't look anymore. I've learned my lesson.
So
then I look. Until then, I don't look.
So I think that, like, there's something to be said for a person knowing that there is somebody in the world that they can always come to and tell them whatever it is, and know that they will not be loved less, for sharing and being truthful and being honest. I would like to think that we have that relationship with God. I mean, I would like to think, the saddest month of the Hebrew calendar is Av. And that's when the temples were destroyed. And there's a generous reading that, a house can be destroyed. Parents, God forbid, can split up. I mean, we're all suffering the inherited trauma of religion and all the things. But we don't have a house anymore as a nation, as a people, God's house is destroyed. God's forced back into the closet. And the Jewish people in that split all took different pieces. Different parts of the Jewish people took different parts of the inheritance, and we're all deficient. But there's something comforting in knowing that our parent is just as much our parent. The love for the child doesn't change because the dynamic of the family structure changes. And I think that maybe that's why we deploy the name of the Hebrew month is Av, which means father, in the saddest time of the year, that it's meant to be Menachem Av. It's meant to be a comfort that is genetic. Like, spiritually, our souls have their source in God. There's no divorcing us from God. And I think that's the way a kid needs to feel to their parents. There's nothing you can do. It's nebuch. If you're my kids, there's nothing you can do about it. You're stuck, right? You have one. So I think I do that part well. Perhaps too much, which is why everything's cooler than I am, because they know that once they binge watch all of Netflix and all that, I'll still be there, right? I'm not going anywhere, and so But I think there's something powerful in a person. We're told, this will be the last Rabbi piece. I'm sorry, sometimes it's hard to turn it off. We're meant to tell people, the Torah says, we're meant to love another like we love ourselves. And if we don't love ourselves, then we can't properly love another. Being able to give over to a kid that self-worth. You're lovable because you're lovable. Because God doesn't put extra people in this world. It doesn't make a difference if you're going to wear pants or skirts, what pronouns or no pronouns. You're lovable because you're a human being, and you're my human being, and you're God's human being. And all the bad things that happen in the world is because people dehumanize people. So whatever we can do to empower people with that sense of worth, that we're worthy of it. We're worthy of it because we're here. I think that's good, regardless of whatever modifiers we have. We're human beings, and we need to do better at being. One final question for you, Bear, and I'm happy to try to think about an answer as you answer. How do we as dads model divesting from complicity in sexism?
I need to now talk my brain into leaving alone something. You just said something. You said God doesn't make extra people. And there's something about that really captures my imagination. Like the idea that we need everybody is very appealing to me in a certain way. If only because I think it might help me to figure out better ways to deal with some of the people I don't like, in addition to, helping me more fully appreciate the people I do like. We talk a lot in our house about sexism, about gender roles, about oppression, about stigma and stigmatized identities. I'm constant, my answer to a lot of these questions is a version of, you have to talk about it all the time. And you have to talk about it even when you think nobody's listening. You have to talk about it, as best you can, even before they're really paying attention. I sit with my kids and watch a show, and then we talk about it. Why did they make the story this way? What do you think about what she said? What do you think about what he did? What's happening here with this 4 boys and 1 girl situation that we're having again? What books are we reading? What do we like about this story? How would you change it? Is it like what you experienced? If you were in this, oh God, Paw Patrol, if you were in this situation, what would you do? And a lot of that is, that sort of cognitive apprenticeship, where you sort of get kids to think through a question or a problem with you. Like, what would you do in this situation? How do you think this person is feeling about this? What could change in order to make a more fair outcome, et cetera, et cetera. And the truth is that we do it about a lot of things. We're often talking not just about the narrative, but also about the meta-narrative. Not only what does it say, but what does it mean to say that? What does it mean for this person to say that? What does it mean for this person to say that now, or here, or to those people? Because I think a lot of things are contextual, and I think that kids really can understand a lot of that, often more than I think larger society gives them credit for. But I think that divestment is often really just divestment from sexism is often really a question of continually examining and continually considering what's happening and why. I love those moments when my kids, spontaneously critique a sexist billboard. I'm like, oh yes, that's true. But in my heart, I just am like, yes, we're doing it. It's happening. But then again, I feel the same way when they spontaneously say thank you when someone hands them something. which I've reminded them about that approximately 100 million times too. And eventually, right? Like, but my big, yes, if I had one thing about how to divest from sexism, it would be asking lots and lots and lots of questions about what's happening and who's doing it and why and what are they showing and what does that mean?
Yeah. No, that's a lot of work. I mean, but that's the work of parenting is questioning the givens and the questions, that we have. I'll answer briefly. I try to model doing the right thing in front of my kids, in part because if they weren't there, I'd be less motivated to do the right thing. So I was having issue with my phone. It's a long story, but basically I bought a phone. They delivered it to the store during a snowstorm. So they sent it back to Kentucky. I went to pick it up and they were like, okay, no problem. We'll refund that, but you just need to buy another one. So I bought a second one and they never refunded the first one. It was a good time. This happened in December. So it's been going on forever. I mean, forever. It's been going on for 3 months. So they turned off my service again, and I was in the car, and I was driving with my son, Tal, and I called them up, and I said, listen, the fee for this, for me, is not a game changer. And thank God I have a job, but like we're in the middle of a pandemic, and I'm articulate, and I can yell, and I was on the phone for a long time, but I said, I'm doing this because not everybody is resourced that I am. And like what you're doing is not okay. And it's not okay for these reasons. And like, what is this? And I went through. Had Tal not been there, I would have been screaming at the top of my lungs, like, I'm going to defenestrate you. Where are you right now? I'm coming to your house, right? It would have been like, there would have been a wedgie and a flagpole, and like this, it wouldn't have happened again. I would have taught this person a lesson. Nebuch, this person had nothing to do with it. It was the donut, whatever. So for me, selfishly, seeing that I am being seen, and knowing that I am contributing to somebody who will impact the lives of others is a deeper well for me as a parent to model. As a proof text, the Torah says that we're meant to be holy. And the verse says, Kadeshim tiyu ki kadesh ani. God says, I want you to be holy. Why? Ki kadesh ani, because I'm also holy. And Ramosha Feinstein, who died in the 80s, points out that as parents, like we can only make a fair ask, if we're willing to do the same thing, right? Like, well, Tati, how come you don't do that? Well, because I have kids now, and so now you get to mow the lawn, because when I was a kid, I had to do it, right? So that's different than, no, I'm doing this, and that's why I can ask you to do this, because this is the right way to do this. And it's so right that even though it's difficult, it's worth putting in the effort. I know we're out of time. I hope this is the beginning of a conversation. Two dads talking about.
I think we're going to be a series. This is too much fun to just do it one time.
Bring your own Homentashen next time.
There you go.
Bear, I can't even tell you, your words, your passion, your intellect, your sensitivity, your thoughtfulness, your humor, your creativity, your being is a blessing. Thank you for sharing of those blessings with us. Thank you to Jesse for handling and being the person behind the screen. For folks who are interested in more programs like this, please reach out to CBST, inundate their mailbox with desires and specific suggestions of how we can be a resource to the broader world, and make it easier for them to say yes than to say no. And thank you, Bear. Bear, any final thoughts or words or rebuttals?
No. No, just I so appreciate this. I appreciate you, and I appreciate like being in conversation. For so much of the work that I have to do, and maybe you too, is very much stand there, say something, people will applaud, they'll go. Which I'm not mad at it. I've gotten good at it at this point, but I enjoy your mind, and I enjoy your politics, and I enjoy like getting to chew on things. I think we should do more of these. I think Two Dads talking about should be a series. I'm ready.
Awesome. I'm excited. And for those who don't know, that March 31st is Trans Day of Visibility. And again, this year, CBST is hosting a virtual convening. Feel free to email info@cbst.org. And we also have merchandise now for the convening. Whether you're coming or not, you can have an amazing matzah cover because it falls during Pesach. You can have, I think if you want a kosher for Passover coffee mug or tea mug, all mugs are kosher for Passover, assuming you don't put, your dip your cracker in it ahead of time. But we have a mug with the and other posters. They're all done by a really special artist, Jess. Anyways, feel free to take a look at the website. There's a whole website with all the information. And let's continue the last thought. The King David writes, Hamanti ki ani adaber, that the drasha is, I believe because I talk about it. Hamanti, I believe, ki ani adaber. The more that I talk about it, the more real it becomes. And so the more that we talk about these issues, the more we can allow the knowledge to actually be impactful and to have an effect in a positive way in the world of reality. Thank you all so much. Bear, particularly thank you for being part of my world, part of my reality, and I cannot wait until the next one.
Me neither. Take good
Thanks
care.
so much,
Thanks so
friends.
much. Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Thanks for joining. See you next time.